The day had started like so many others, yet something about it felt heavier than usual. The air in the small room seemed still, almost thick, as if it shared the weight sitting on their chest. They sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the scattered notebooks and half-finished tasks on the desk. Every page felt like a reminder of all the things they hadn't completed, all the goals they were slipping behind on, all the pressure that kept growing no matter how hard they tried. For weeks, maybe months, their mind had been running without rest. Thoughts overlapped like tangled threads, studied deadlines, work responsibilities, family expectations. Unfinished plans, small promises made to themselves that they never had the energy to keep. Every morning they told themselves they would do better that day. They would focus, they would stay calm, they would be stronger. But by evening the tension returned, wrapping around their shoulders until the muscles ached. They weren't lazy. They weren't unmotivated. They were simply exhausted, mentally, emotionally, and even physically. The feeling was difficult to describe to anyone. If someone asked how they were doing, they would say they were fine, even though fine was far from the truth. Inside, it felt like they were holding back a storm that kept growing and growing, most nights. They stayed awake much longer than they should have. Sometimes they would lie in silence, waiting for their thoughts to slow down. Other times they scrolled through their phone, hoping distraction would help. But nothing helped. The tension stayed, the noise in their heads stayed, and the fear of failing stayed too. They had always dreamed of doing well, of learning new things, growing, of building a stable future. They wanted to be someone they could be proud of. But lately, it felt like they were losing control of everything. Simple tasks took longer. Concentration slipped away within minutes. Even reading a single page felt exhausting. Anxiety crept into the smallest parts of their day, turning tiny decisions into overwhelming challenges. They had never thought anxiety could be this strong. It wasn't the dramatic kind they had seen in movies. It was quiet, slow, a constant pressure that made their chest feel tight and their breath feel shallow. Some days they woke up tired even after sleeping for hours. Other days they couldn't find the energy to start anything at all. One particular evening, after a long day of trying and failing to focus on their work, they sat on the floor with their back against the bed. They let out a long breath and rubbed their tired eyes. They wished for just a moment of quiet in their mind, just a moment where everything didn't feel overwhelming. Their phone was next to them, screen glowing softly. They weren't exactly searching for anything. In truth, they were only scrolling out of habit. Yet somehow, in the middle of endless videos and unrelated posts, a thumbnail appeared showing someone playing a cello next to a piano. The title mentioned something about calming focus and relief. Normally, they would have skipped past it. Music didn't usually make a big difference for them when they were anxious, but something about the image, the dim light, peaceful setup, made them tap on it. The first sound was a low, warm note from the cello. It filled the room in a way that surprised them. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it carried a softness that their heart immediately reacted to. The tone felt like someone gently placing a hand on their shoulder and telling them everything was okay. Then the piano entered. Light, clear, and gentle. The notes blended with the cello in a smooth, natural way. For the first time in a long while, they felt their shoulders loosen. Their breathing slowed without them forcing it. The constant tightness inside their chest relaxed. Just a little. They didn't understand why this music felt different from others they had heard before. Maybe it was the deep richness of the cello, or the peaceful rhythm of the piano, or maybe it was simply the right moment, the right sound, arriving exactly when they needed it. Whatever the reason, they kept listening. Minutes passed, but they didn't notice. The usual racing thoughts that crowded their mind grew quieter. The noise softened, leaving space for calmness, feeling they had almost forgotten was possible. They closed their eyes. For a while, the world outside the music didn't matter. Not the deadlines, not the pressure, not the expectations. Just sound, breath, and stillness. When the track ended, they opened their eyes slowly. Something felt different. Nothing in their life had changed in that moment, yet they felt a tiny shift inside themselves. A sense of relief, as if part of the tension had finally loosened. They played the video again, and again. Each time brought the same calming effect. Each time helped their minds settle just a little more. The room felt less heavy. Their body felt lighter. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, but it was real, something they could feel in their heartbeat. And in their breath. The music didn't magically fix everything, but it became the first thing in weeks that made them feel grounded. It made them feel as if they could breathe again. They hadn't realized how deeply they needed something to reconnect them to themselves. That night, they stayed seated on the floor longer than they planned. Tears didn't fall, but their eyes softened with the emotion they had been holding back for days. The music wasn't just beautiful, it felt like understanding. Like someone had poured into notes the very emotions they couldn't explain. When they finally stood up, they glanced at the messy desk again. For the first time in a long time, instead of feeling anxious, they felt calm enough to pick up one notebook. They flipped through its pages, not with dread, but with a quiet hope that maybe things could get better. The night didn't end with a sudden breakthrough or a magical burst of motivation. It ended simply with them taking a deep breath and letting their body rest peacefully for the first time in weeks. The next morning, they woke up feeling slightly refreshed. Not completely healed, not completely changed, but lighter. They reached for their phone and searched for the same cello and piano music. As the melody played softly through the speakers, they noticed how it made their mind feel steady. It didn't force anything. It just guided their thoughts into a quiet space. It became a small ritual. Every morning, they listened. Every evening, they returned to it when anxiety began to rise again. Over the next few days, they realized that the music helped create moments of clarity. Moments where their mind wasn't clouded by fear or overthinking. Moments where they could focus long enough to complete small tasks. Simpler things like organizing their notebook or reviewing a short chapter no longer felt impossible. Inside them, a new kind of hope began to grow. A quiet belief that maybe their situation wasn't as hopeless as it felt. Maybe they could find their way back to the version of themselves they missed, the motivated one, the curious one, the one who wanted to learn and grow. They still struggled. Anxiety didn't disappear overnight. There were days when old habits returned and focus slipped again. But every time things became too heavy, they went back to the music that had brought them calm on that difficult evening. It felt like a discovery, a small but meaningful turning point, something they needed, even though they hadn't been searching for it. Deep inside, without realizing it fully yet, they had taken the first step toward rebuilding their focus, their peace, and their confidence. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real, and every quiet, calming note of the cello and piano became the soundtrack of their slow, gentle rebirth, a beginning they didn't expect, but one their heart was ready for. The days that followed felt strangely different, almost as if a thin layer of fog had lifted from their mind. It wasn't dramatic, and it wasn't constant, but there were small moments when everything felt just a little clearer. Those moments were new to them, and they held onto them carefully, almost protectively. Each one felt like proof that maybe change was possible. Every morning before starting anything, they played the same cello and piano tracks. At first, it was simply because the sound brought them calm. But soon, it became a part of their routine in a way they didn't fully expect. They would sit on the edge of the bed or lean against the wall near the window, letting the notes fill the room while the sun slowly climbed into the sky. The music made the mornings softer. It made the day feel less heavy. It allowed their thoughts to settle into place instead of rushing ahead with panic. And in those few gentle minutes, they found something they hadn't felt in a long time: control. One particular morning, as the cello hummed through the speakers, they noticed how their breathing settled into a calm rhythm without any effort. Their shoulders relaxed, their mind quieted. And for the first time in what felt like months, they picked up their notebook and didn't feel scared of the tasks inside it. They didn't expect miracles. They weren't waiting for a sudden burst of motivation. They only wanted one thing: a little peace inside their own head. Every small step felt like something worth appreciating. Throughout the next week, something interesting began to happen. They found themselves looking forward to the quiet moments that the music created. Even on difficult days, they reached for their headphones because they knew it would help steady them. The simple action became a way of showing care to themselves, a way of saying, "You're trying. That's enough." The people around them began to notice a small shift. They still looked tired at times, still quiet, still deep in thought, but there was something different in their eyes. A softness, a kind of calm that hadn't been there before. When someone asked how they were doing, they didn't automatically respond with a thoughtless, "I'm fine." Instead, they paused, as if checking in with themselves, and then answered honestly with, "I'm managing." And that small change mattered more than anyone realized. One evening, while finishing a simple task they had been avoiding for days, they caught themselves smiling slightly. It wasn't a big smile, just a tiny one, almost a hint, but it felt real. It felt like progress. They sat back, leaned against the chair, and listened again to the familiar cello melody. The room felt warm and peaceful, even though nothing around them had truly changed. It was their mind that had shifted. Their thoughts weren't fighting them as much. And that alone felt like relief. As the days passed, the music began influencing more than just their mornings. They started using it during study sessions too. At first, they worried it might distract them, but surprisingly it did the opposite. The melodies created a gentle rhythm that helped them stay in focus longer than they had in weeks. It wasn't that their minds suddenly became perfectly sharp. There were still moments when distractions pulled them away or anxiety tried to tighten its grip again. But now they had something to bring them back, a familiar sound that quieted the noise inside. One afternoon, while sitting at the table with their books spread out, they realized they had been working for almost an hour without stopping. That was something they hadn't been able to do for a very long time. They blinked in surprise, almost unable to believe it. They took a deep breath, leaned back, and allowed themselves to feel proud. Not overly proud, not exaggerated, but quietly, softly proud. The kind of pride that comes from finally doing something you weren't sure you could still do. This new routine began shaping their days more than they had expected. They slept a little better. They ate with a bit more appetite. They walked around with a lighter step. Even if the rest of the world didn't notice the change, they could feel it inside. There were still difficult days, though. Days when everything felt too much again. Days when their minds slipped back into old habits, overthinking, worrying, doubting. On those days, they felt frustrated, almost angry with themselves for not being able to hold on to the progress they had made. But each time, the anxiety came back. Something inside them whispered, "Try the music again." And so they did. They would sit in a quiet corner, close their eyes, and let the cello's deep, soothing voice wash over them. The piano would follow soon after, like gentle footsteps approaching carefully. Bit by bit, the tightness inside loosened. It didn't erase their anxiety completely, but it helped them breathe through it. It helped them remember that they weren't failing, they were healing. And healing wasn't supposed to be perfect or smooth. It was messy. It took time, and they were finally allowing themselves that time. Around this period, something else began to change as well. They became a little kinder to themselves. They didn't push themselves to be perfect anymore. They didn't expect themselves to function like a machine. They allowed breaks. They allowed rest. They allowed the possibility of trying again instead of giving up completely. One late afternoon, they stepped outside their building for a short walk. The air was cool, and the sky carried warm colors as the sun began to set. They listened to the same cello on piano track in their headphones, and each step felt calmer, smoother. Almost synchronized with the music, they noticed small details they had been too stressed to see before: the quiet rustle of leaves, the soft chatter of neighbors, the distant sound of traffic, the way the sky shifted from gold to orange to pink. These small things felt new again, like rediscovering a part of life they had forgotten in that quiet moment. While walking and listening, they felt a tiny spark of gratitude. Not for something big or extraordinary, just for the feeling of peace that music brought them. For the first time in a very long time, they didn't feel trapped inside their own mind. When they returned home, their evening tasks no longer felt impossible. They sat at their desk with a calm, steady breath and a clearer mind. The music played softly beside them, not as a distraction, but as gentle company they had come to rely on. Over the next few days, they explored more cello and piano tracks. Some were soft and slow. Others were slightly more uplifting. But all of them carried something comforting, something their heart understood even when their mind felt too tired. One night, while listening to a particularly emotional melody, they thought about how far they had come in just a few weeks. They remembered the evening when they first stumbled onto the music, sitting on the floor overwhelmed and exhausted. They remembered the tension in their chest, the impatience with themselves, the fear that they were falling behind, and now here they were, lighter, calmer, more hopeful. Not perfect, not completely free from anxiety, but stronger in a quiet way. They realized that healing doesn't always come in big, dramatic ways. Sometimes it comes through small, simple things that reach your heart at the right moment. For them, that simple thing was music. It amazed them how something so gentle could create such a shift, how it could make their mind feel supported, how it could turn difficult moments into moments of reflection instead of panic. They didn't talk about this change to many people. It felt too personal, too meaningful. Something between them and the sound that helped them breathe, something that didn't need big explanations. Still, the impact was clear in their daily life. They became more organized. Their study sessions grew longer. Their focus improved little by little. Even their handwriting became steadier on the page. When someone noticed that their work looked more polished and asked what changed, they simply smiled and said, "I've been taking things slowly. It's helping." Maybe one day they would share the whole truth, that music had become their quiet partner in healing. But for now, they kept it inside, letting it continue its gentle work. Night after night, they returned to the melodies. And every time they pressed play, it felt like coming home to a safe place inside themselves. They didn't know what the future held. They didn't know if the anxiety would come back stronger one day. But they knew one thing with certainty. They had found something that helped them reconnect with their own strength. And sometimes, one discovery is enough to begin transforming everything in the comfort of their room. With cello and piano guiding their breath, they felt themselves moving into a new chapter one, where healing no longer felt like a faraway dream, but something slowly unfolding. Softly and steadily, day by day, morning light slowly entered the room. Soft and quiet, touching the walls with a pale glow. For the first time in a long while, waking up did not feel like a struggle against their own thoughts. They opened their eyes, took a slow breath, and reached for their phone, not to scroll mindlessly, but to play the music that had become a part of their days. The first note of the cello felt like a gentle greeting, familiar and comforting. They let it play as they sat up and stretched their arms. Even this small action felt easier now. There was something grounding about starting the day with sound instead of chaos. Something that made the world feel less sharp, less overwhelming. They had begun to trust the routine. Each morning, the melodies helped them settle into themselves before stepping into whatever the day demanded. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was their anchor one that held them steady when their mind tried to wander into stress. After a few minutes of listening, they stood and walked to the window. Outside, the street was waking up too. A shopkeeper pulled open the shutters of his store. A cyclist passed by with quiet wheels. The familiar sounds of the neighborhood felt calmer when paired with the music. They smiled faintly. The world had always been the same, but their way of seeing it had changed. Within an hour, they sat at their desk with a cup of warm tea and their notebook open in front of them. They took a few deep breaths, letting the music continue in the background. For a moment, they simply enjoyed the stillness. Then, slowly, they began to write. Their handwriting had improved. It no longer carried the rushed, shaky energy of stress. It flowed more naturally, more thoughtfully. They worked for a while without looking at the time. By the time they did glance at the clock, nearly 2 hours had passed. 2 hours. For someone else, that might have been normal. For them, it felt like a small achievement, a moment worth recognizing. They closed their notebook gently and leaned back in the chair. The music continued playing, and they let themselves enjoy the feeling of quiet satisfaction. This new rhythm of life didn't remove every challenge. They still had difficult days, still had moments when anxiety crept in like a shadow. But now they had learned to respond differently. Instead of panicking when their thoughts rushed, they paused instead of forcing themselves through exhaustion. They took a break. Instead of drowning in self-doubt, they played the music and allowed it to guide them back to calm. These small choices slowly began to change them. One evening, after finishing a long task, they stepped outside for some fresh air. The sky above them held a soft blue that slowly darkened as night approached. They walked slowly, letting the world settle around them. They found a quiet corner under a tree near the building and sat down on a low bench. People walked by, some chatting, some laughing, some lost in their own routines. It reminded them that everyone carried something, even if it wasn't visible. They took out their phone, put on their headphones, and played the same piece of cello and piano that had helped them since the beginning. As the sounds filled their ears, they closed their eyes gently. For a few minutes, everything faded, the noise, the movement, the worries waiting at home. The world became a single calm moment, shaped by music and breath. They remembered the night they first discovered the track, how overwhelmed they had felt, how heavy everything seemed, how even breathing felt like hard work. But now, sitting under the tree with a calm mind, they realized how far they had come. Healing didn't look like people described it. It didn't come in sudden flashes of inspiration or a dramatic turning point. Instead, it came in small, quiet steps, like listening to a melody that slowly taught their heart how to breathe again. When they returned home, they felt more centered, more aware of the progress they had made. They sat at the desk again, but this time not to force productivity, only to reflect. They opened a fresh page in their notebook and wrote a few sentences about their day. They wrote about the calm morning, the focused study session, the peaceful walk, and the silent moment under the tree. Then they wrote something they hadn't written in a long time. I'm proud of myself. The words surprised them, not because they didn't feel true, because they couldn't remember the last time they had allowed themselves to feel that way. They closed the notebook slowly, letting the words sit there like a small promise. Days continued like this, gentle, steady, and full of small victories. They no longer judged themselves for moving slowly. Instead, they appreciated the fact that they were moving at all. One afternoon, after finishing their tasks earlier than expected, they decided to explore new music. They searched for more cello and piano blends, curious about what other melodies could offer the same calm. They found a playlist filled with a variety of pieces, some soft like a whisper, others slightly more energetic. As they listened through the playlist, they felt a soft excitement building. Each track carried something different, yet every one of them made their thoughts ease gently into place. The more they explored, the more they realized how deeply music affected their emotions. They wondered why they had never noticed this before. Maybe they were too busy, too overwhelmed, too anxious to pay attention. Or maybe they simply needed the right moment, the right sound, to awaken this part of themselves. Whatever the reason, it felt like they were rediscovering a part of life that had been muted for years. A few days later, they experienced something that confirmed their growth. They woke up feeling anxious, much more anxious than usual. Their thoughts raced and their chest felt tight. For a moment, fear tried to take over. But instead of falling into the old cycle of panic, they reached for their headphones. They sat still, closed their eyes, and played the familiar track. At first, the anxiety didn't go away quickly. It stayed, stubborn and tense. But the music worked like a slow tide, gently pulling them away from the edge. The cello's deep vibration reached into the tight parts of their chest. The piano's soft notes brushed against the racing thoughts. Slowing them down, they breathed in, they breathed out. Slowly the heaviness softened. The panic loosened. The tightness eased. When they opened their eyes, it felt steadier. And that moment meant everything, because it showed them that they were no longer helpless against their anxiety. They had tools, now simple, gentle tools that helped them find balance when everything felt too much. Later that day, they sat at their desk to continue their tasks. They didn't rush. They didn't push themselves too hard. They simply worked at a steady pace, letting the music guide their focus. As they wrote, they realized something important. Healing was no longer just something happening to them. It was something they were participating in, something they were choosing every day, each time they pressed play on the music, each time they breathed through their stress, each time they allowed themselves to rest. They were choosing to rebuild their life gently, piece by piece. One evening, after a long but satisfying day, they received a message from a friend asking how they had been. Normally, they would respond with something short and simple, but this time, they felt comfortable enough to share a little. "I've been taking things slowly," they wrote. "Listening to calming music helps a lot. It makes my days feel easier." Their friend replied with a supportive message, and for the first time in a long time, they didn't feel embarrassed talking about their struggles. They felt understood that night. As they lay down to sleep, they played another soft cello track. The notes carried them into rest with a gentle weight that felt comforting. Sleep came easier. The following morning, they woke up before their alarm. That almost never happened. They sat up, stretched, and smiled to themselves. The air felt lighter, and the sunlight entering the room seemed brighter than usual. They prepared their tea, took a seat at the desk, and pressed play. As the first note echoed softly through the room, they realized something deep inside. They were rebuilding their life not through big dramatic changes, but through small moments of peace, through music, breath, and gentle steps. The cello and piano had become more than sounds. They had become reminders of calm, guides to clarity, and quiet teachers showing them how to trust their own strength again. And in these quiet yet powerful daily rituals, they felt something new blossoming inside them, a sense of direction, a sense of hope, a sense of rebirth, slow, steady, and real, shaping them into someone stronger than the version they used to be. The early morning light slipped gently through the curtains, soft and quiet, almost as if it didn't want to disturb anything in the room. For a moment, everything felt still. It was the kind of silence that makes a person pause and breathe a little deeper. And in that silence, a sense of clarity began to take shape, almost like a whisper reminding someone that every new day carries its own promise, even though the previous days had been full of thoughts, emotions, and moments of unexpected reflection. Something about this morning felt different. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was subtle, but real, like a calm that settles into the heart when someone finally understands something important. After taking a moment to sit up slowly, there was a quiet awareness of how the violin's gentle sound from the night before still seemed to echo softly in the mind. It wasn't really there, but the memory of the music felt fresh, like the notes had painted a peaceful mark inside. That soft harmony carried a sense of warmth and direction, the kind that doesn't fade quickly outside. Faint sounds of life began to rise, a bird calling somewhere distant, the hum of someone walking on the sidewalk, a breeze moving lightly through the leaves. These small, ordinary sounds blended into something comforting. It reminded them that the world kept moving, gently encouraging anyone who listened to move with it. There was no rush that morning. Instead, everything unfolded naturally. They took time to stretch, to breathe, to let the muscles loosen and the mind settle before stepping into the day. It wasn't forced. It wasn't hurried. It was simply intentional, a quiet choice to begin the day with presence. After washing up and preparing a warm drink, they sat near the window where the sunlight fell in a soft golden patch across the floor. The cup felt warm between the hands, grounding and familiar. With each sip, there was a slow return to focus, a gentle reminder that taking care of small moments often shapes the bigger ones. The violin rested nearby on its stand, its wooden surface catching the soft glow of the morning light. Just looking at it brought back memories of the first time they had held it, of the early days when the sound was uneven and unsure. Now, the connection to it felt deeper, more like a trusted friend than an instrument. But today wasn't about practice or perfecting a piece of music. Instead, it was about something more personal, reconnecting with the emotions behind the sound. Music had always been a way to express feelings that didn't fit into words, and recently, life had brought up many feelings that needed space. Taking the violin gently in hand, they closed their eyes for a moment before lifting it to their shoulder. The bow rested lightly on the strings. There was no plan for what to play, only a need to let the music find its own path. The first note rose softly, smooth and full, like a quiet breath released after being held too long. Then another note followed, and another, each one blending into the next. The melody didn't follow any written sheet. It was simple, honest, shaped by whatever the heart wanted to express. There was something healing about that. When the bow moved slowly, the notes felt warm and comforting. When the bow picked up speed, the music carried a quiet strength, as if reminding them of the determination that had been slowly growing inside. The room filled with the gentle sound. And in that moment, everything felt connected: the thoughts, the emotions, the quiet morning air. It was as if the music wrapped every piece of life into one clear feeling: hope. After a while, the melody softened into silence. The violin lowered slowly, and a deep breath followed. They felt lighter, calmer, more sure of the path ahead. Later in the morning, they stepped outside for a walk. The air felt fresh, and the sunlight warmed the skin with a natural ease. People moved about their day, some smiling, some lost in thought, some rushing, some strolling. But everyone was part of the same quiet rhythm that the morning had set. There was something grounding in just walking without a destination, letting the feet move, letting the mind wander in a gentle way, observing without judgment. A child laughed nearby as a small ball rolled across the grass. Someone watered their plants with care. A shopkeeper lifted the shutters of a small storefront. Little scenes of ordinary life. Yet somehow, they carried a comforting sense of belonging as the walk continued. Thoughts drifted back to the moments that had shaped the last few days, the moments of doubt, the quiet discoveries, the slow building of courage. It became clear that growth didn't happen all at once. It happened through small realizations, gentle steps, honest reflections. The music had helped open a door inside, but walking through that door required patience. And now, finally, there was a feeling of being ready. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough to move forward. Returning home. They sat down at the small desk where a notebook waited. The pages were mostly blank, with a few lines written over the last couple of days. It wasn't a journal of events. It was a journal of feelings, thoughts that were easier to process when written down. Slowly, the pen touched the page, and words began to flow. Today feels like a turning point. Not because something big happened, but because I finally feel calm enough to understand myself. The music helped me see what I've been carrying inside. I'm learning to breathe again, to focus again, to appreciate simple moments. Maybe this is what healing actually looks like: quiet, steady, and gentle. The writing continued for a while, not rushed, not forced, just honest. By the time the pen lifted, there was a soft sense of relief. Later in the afternoon, they prepared a simple meal and sat quietly while eating, letting the mind rest. For the first time in a long while, the food tasted more flavorful, the air felt lighter, and the heart felt a little more open. As the sun began to set, the sky turned into soft shades of orange and gold. The warm glow reflected inside the room, creating a peaceful atmosphere. They returned to the violin, not to play, but simply to hold it for a moment. The smooth surface, the familiar weight, it felt like a reminder of how far they had come. Not in skill, not in achievement, but in understanding themselves. They didn't need to find all the answers right now. They didn't need everything figured out. What mattered was the willingness to keep moving, to keep learning, to keep listening to the quiet guidance within. The day ended with a sense of gentle hope, a feeling that tomorrow could bring something new, something meaningful. And as they lay down to rest, the same soft harmony from the morning drifted back into their thoughts. Not as a memory, but as a promise that the journey, though slow and steady, was leading somewhere brighter. The days had begun to feel different for the person who once struggled with anxiety, scattered thoughts, and endless pressure. They didn't notice the change all at once. It came slowly, like morning light moving across a quiet room. But now, standing at this point in their journey, they could feel something inside them had shifted. Something gentle but powerful. It felt like a new beginning, a new version of themselves forming quietly, without noise, without force. Just steady growth. Music had become a part of their life in a way they never expected. When they had first heard the deep notes of the cello mixed with the soft, flowing sound of the piano, they hadn't imagined that it would become something so important. They didn't know it would help them breathe easier, think clearer, and move through the world with a calmer heart. Yet here they were, living in the middle of a change they couldn't fully explain, but deeply felt. Every morning, they sat by the window with a cup of warm tea, letting the soft melody guide their mind into a peaceful place. They didn't rush. They didn't think about the tasks waiting for them. They didn't worry about everything they couldn't control. They just sat, listened, and allowed the music to become a bridge between the person they had been and the person they were becoming. During these moments, memories of the struggle they once carried would come back, to scare them, but to remind them how far they had come. They remembered the nights when their heart beat too fast, when their mind felt like a storm that wouldn't stop, when they would sit in silence hoping for even a few seconds of peace. They remembered the days when studying felt impossible, when focus slipped through their hands like sand, and when even simple tasks became mountains. Now, things were different. Not perfect, but different, better. The music had given them something they didn't know they needed: space. Space to breathe, space to feel, space to think without pressure. It had become a gentle friend, sitting beside them when they felt overwhelmed, steadying their mind when life felt too heavy. They never expected something so simple to have such an impact. But sometimes the smallest things carry the greatest power. As days passed, people around them noticed the change too. They seemed more present, more grounded. They spoke with a calm tone, listened more patiently, and handled stressful situations with a surprising strength. When someone asked what had changed, they smiled quietly and said, "I think I finally learned how to slow down." They never mentioned the music unless someone truly wanted to understand. It was something personal, a part of their journey that felt sacred. Still, they shared it with a few friends who were also struggling, those who felt lost, tired, or unable to focus. They would send them a link to the same kind of cello and piano music that had helped them and say, "Try this. Sit quietly for just a few minutes. Let it help you settle." Some of their friends later said it helped them too. Not always in the same way, but enough to bring a bit of peace into their day. There was a growing sense of purpose inside them. They began to understand that their journey wasn't only about finding peace for themselves. It was also about being able to guide others, even in small ways. They realized that healing wasn't just personal, it could ripple outward, touching people they cared about and even people they would never meet. On some evenings, they would sit in their room with the lights dimmed, listening to long, calming cello pieces while reflecting on life. Their breathing would slow. Their thoughts would become soft, floating gently instead of rushing. It felt like they were learning a language without words, a language that spoke directly to their heart. The more they listened, the more they understood themselves. The music revealed emotions they had ignored, dreams they had buried, and fears they had avoided. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, they felt supported. The music didn't judge them. It didn't push them. It simply sat with them through everything. One night, something changed in them. They were listening to a slow, emotional cello piece when a thought appeared suddenly, clear and honest. "I'm not the same person I used to be." It was not a thought of pride or regret. It was a thought of recognition. They realized that the version of themselves who had struggled so much, who felt trapped inside their own mind, who felt small and tired, was slowly fading. Not disappearing because those experiences had shaped them, but transforming, turning into something stronger, something calmer, something more whole. For the first time, they felt ready to trust the future. Not because they knew what would happen, because they finally believed they had the inner strength to face it. They started making small plans for themselves. They set goals, not big ones that caused pressure, but gentle ones. They created a study schedule that felt manageable. They added short breaks filled with music. They allowed themselves to rest without guilt. They practiced focusing on one thing at a time, instead of trying to do everything at once. These changes brought results they could feel. Their concentration improved. Their productivity grew. They learned faster, understood deeper, and worked with a clear mind. They discovered that focus wasn't something you force it was something you welcomed by creating the right space for it. Every step forward made them feel lighter. Every calm moment felt like a gift. Every deep breath felt like a small victory. One weekend, they decided to take a walk in a quiet park. They put their headphones on and let a soft piano track play as they walked under the trees. The wind was cool, the sky was gentle, and the music blended with the world around them. It felt like they were part of something bigger, something peaceful. For the first time, they felt a strong sense of gratitude, not only for the music, but for themselves. For holding on. For trying. For not giving up. They stopped near a small pond and watched the water move. It reflected the sky and the branches above, creating a soft, flowing picture. The music made the moment feel almost like a scene from a film, but it was real. They were living it. They felt a calm smile forming on their face. In that moment, they understood what was happening inside them. They were being reborn, not in a dramatic way, not in a loud or sudden way, but quietly, naturally, like a flower opening slowly in the morning sun, like the first breath after a long night, like a soft wave washing away old worries. Their rebirth came from learning how to breathe with the world instead of fighting against it, from learning how to let go of what hurt, how to accept what they couldn't control, and how to build strength through small daily habits. The cello and piano had guided them toward this place, but they had done the work. They had chosen this path. They had walked through the difficult days and arrived at a softer, brighter place, standing there by the water. They made a silent promise to themselves to protect this peace, to keep listening to their inner voice, to allow themselves to rest when needed, and to never forget how far they had come. They continued walking, feeling lighter than they had in months. The soft melody stayed with them, not just in their ears, but in their heart. It felt like a reminder that life didn't need to be rushed. That healing didn't need to be perfect. That change didn't need to be loud sometimes. The most powerful rebirths happened quietly as the day ended and they returned home. They sat once again by the window with the music playing softly. They took a slow breath, letting the moment settle. They didn't feel lost anymore. They didn't feel helpless. They felt ready. Ready for the next chapter, whatever it may bring. And with that gentle feeling inside, they closed their eyes and allowed the music to carry them forward into a peaceful night, knowing that this time they were walking into the future as a calmer, stronger, and renewed version of themselves.